10 to 8. Anybody any questions? No questions? We'll just sign some books.
Well, I've got a few.
Oh, okay. That's down. My knees are giving up.
Well, tell folks about the amount of research that went into the book, because you labored long and hard to ensure that the historical facts, which, by the way, Lowell annotates in the book, those facts that are true and those that might be fiction. You labored hard to make sure that those facts were absolutely accurate.
Yeah, and you know, you're right. Facts sometimes are hard to come by, but I've done the best that I could to identify some of the facts, and there are many. For example, William Cube is true. What happened to Minsk Ghetto, all those stories are absolutely true. The horror that was there. One of the things I tell you, I was mentioning before that a couple of times the hair on the back of my neck just stood up. One of the instances was this. I have Igor, after he rescues Elena, he has to leave Belarus, and they fly him into Scotland, and he discovers that he is on the Queen Mary, which was called the Grey Ghost. And so this is in fiction. And so I began to do some research, and I discovered that in fact the timing is exactly right. In all probability, Igor Grzinko, the one that we think is Igor, probably took that ship at that time. And this I'm telling you, is, as I say, this makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. And in a couple of other instances, I have when there's two delightful characters there, Captain Chris and Miss Becky, delightful characters. Randy as hell, but they were delightful. They rescue. They don't know who he is. They rescue him and they take him first to the Bahama Islands. And when I'm writing this, the weather is very bad. There's a very bad storm. So I began to do some research, and I find out that, holy cats, 3 days before the date that I have in here, which, because it all has to be timed out properly, there was a hurricane that passed through there. And at this point, the water would have been very, very rough. So there's several instances like that that just absolutely just rock you. And there are many other things that are very curious. I know we're getting a little late here about Igor Grzinko. For example, did you know that the government of the day gave the man that we think is Igor Grzinko, we don't know because he had a hood on all the time, right, which is another thing, gave him $200,000, which in today's terms is several million dollars. Now, in the book, we claim that that's payoff money. Why would they give Igor Grzinko $200,000 in 1945 or 46? So there's a number, and why did he wear this hood all of the time? I mean, very clearly the Russians knew what he looked like. If they were after him, I mean, they would have pictures of him. He'd had a passport with his picture on it. So why? Now, if you read here, you'll see why he wore the hood. And you know what? Like, when you read it, I'm going to tell you, by the time you're finished, you're going to say, you know what? There's something very, very strange about all this. It's fiction, but the whole issue. And one of the things, too, you got to remember is that this was the start of, oh, there's one other thing I meant to mention. I don't know if you know this or not. Notice how he even interrupts himself. Yeah. This is the last. He starts speaking, then he interrupts himself, just like he does you. Well, my mind, you know, at my age, the mind develops very slowly. Igor Grzinko defected, supposedly, on September 3rd, 1943. The world didn't learn about this until almost 5 months later. An American broadcaster named Drew Pearson blew the whistle on this. Why was this kept secret? This man had a list of 102 spies, including, by the way, members of the Canadian Parliament. There were spies operating in the White House, in the Department of Finance. They had sold the atomic secrets to Stalin. Why this 5-month delay? I know why. And the very last, and one of the interesting things here is that throughout all of this story that Grzinko tells, he doesn't know the real story. He doesn't know there's a real story here, a real, much more sinister plot than ever he suspected, which occurred only a few days before the book was published.
Now where...
Do you want to ask a question?
Where in all this time, with all the travel you're doing, and that exhaustive 2-hour-long show,
commercials, you only got about 10 minutes or so. I think it's down to 8 now, isn't it?
Gotta keep farm boy busy, Lowell. But where did you find the time to write the book?
I love it. I love writing. I go home, drive my wife crazy, and sit down at the computer, and after the show, and sometimes I'm there later, 9 o'clock at night. But I absolutely love it.
And did you switch from the pounding on the typewriter to eventually getting yourself a laptop?
You know, my father wrote something like 23 books in longhand. I have no idea how he did that. The only thing that the computer is any good for is writing books. The rest of it, as far as I'm concerned, is just garbage. But I've got some wonder.
Do you know that we ran out of typewriters? Because Lowell...
They only had one.
Lowell and Hal Anthony, the late great Hal Anthony, were the only ones who insisted that they were not going to go to computers, and they wanted to use typewriters, which was fine while we had 15 or 20 typewriters left over from the days before we had computers. But eventually they made their way, mostly Lowell, through the typewriters, and we couldn't get ribbon, the typewriter. That was the day Lowell was, can I say it?
Yeah.
Cursing the ribbon in his typewriter, because every few letters he'd hit that spot on the ribbon that it was worn out. So he'd go to read his script and he couldn't read his script, and that's when we had him hooked, and he actually eventually switched to the computer. But you wrote this on a laptop.
Yes. No, not a partly in a laptop. But I actually have a computer with a screen. Is that what you call it?
Yes. Are there any questions for Lowell? Yes.
I'm curious, probably obvious to some, but what inspired you to start writing?
Probably a need for money. Isn't that what inspires most of us? No, you know, I have my wife. Where's Debbie? Could Debbie stand up? My wife. Where is she? Stand up here. It's an interesting story because I think we were in Merrickville, and Debbie picked up. They had a couple of these books about Grandpa telling his story. I don't know if you've seen them or not. You're supposed to fill out this thing. And so I began to fill this out, and Debbie said, "You know something? You've got so many stories. You should write them down for your grandchildren. They would love to hear these stories." And I began to do that, and from that evolved The Pork Chop and Other Stories, which is a Canadian all-time bestseller. It's one of the best-selling books, I guess, written in this country for a long, long time, aside from Margaret Atwood and a couple of other CBC stars. Well, I have to tell you one other story about... Come on. Is that okay? Sure. About a typewriter. My hero when I was growing up was Gordon Sinclair. Anybody here... farm way up in Arthur there, we would live Gordon Sinclair all the time. He was my hero. So when I went to CFRB in 1990, I guess, Gordon was already gone, had left us, and I said, I need a typewriter. And they searched all, typewriter, what the hell's that? So they finally dug up this old beaten up typewriter with Gordon Sinclair's name scratched in it. And I very proudly used that. I was 4 years at CFRB, and I very proudly used that and pounded out the best stuff that CFRB ever heard since Gordon Sinclair with his typewriter.
Any other questions?
I do.
Yes.
I don't really have a question. I'm very interested now in reading Lowell's book, which I purchased tonight. I'm sure everybody else is. But mostly, I just want to thank Lowell and Steve for informing us about what's going on in this city